Move. That seat isn't yours." The words cracked through the quiet first-class cabin before the aircraft door had even closed, sharp enough to make conversation stop and heads turn toward row 2. Naomi Brooks stood motionless in the aisle, one hand resting lightly on the handle of her small black carry-on, her expression calm despite the challenge hanging in the air. Seat 2A, the window seat printed clearly on her boarding pass, was already occupied by a well-dressed white man comfortably sipping sparkling water as though he had been there all along. Ethan Caldwell crossed one polished loafer over the other and barely glanced up before dismissing her with another wave of his hand. "There are empty seats in coach. You'll be more comfortable back there." A few passengers exchanged uneasy looks while others pretended to study their phones, choosing silence over involvement. Naomi neither frowned nor argued. She simply looked at the boarding pass once more, then back to the man sitting exactly where she belonged. The cabin smelled of fresh coffee and new leather, the soft glow of overhead lighting reflecting against polished armrests and champagne glasses prepared for departure. Outside the windows, baggage crews hurried beneath the late afternoon sun while the steady hum of ground equipment vibrated faintly beneath the floor. Everything about the scene suggested another ordinary flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, except for the growing tension gathering around one seat. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi Brooks. She stepped forward just enough for Ethan to hear her without raising her voice. "I believe you're sitting in my assigned seat." Her tone carried no anger, only certainty. Ethan chuckled loudly enough for nearby rows to hear. "Assigned? That's cute." His smile widened as if the entire exchange existed solely for his amusement. "You people always think the rules bend for you." A hush settled across the cabin. A woman in the aisle seat across from them slowly lowered the novel she had been reading. A young father farther back removed one earbud. Even the flight attendant greeting passengers near the boarding door glanced toward the commotion before walking briskly down the aisle. Nicole Harper, the lead flight attendant, arrived wearing the practiced smile of someone accustomed to solving problems quickly. "Is there an issue?" she asked. Ethan answered before Naomi had the chance. "This woman insists I'm in her seat." Nicole extended her hand politely toward Naomi. "May I see your boarding pass?" Naomi handed it over without hesitation. Nicole looked at it for only a brief second before turning her attention back to Ethan, her smile never fading. "Sir, thank you for your patience." Then she faced Naomi again. "There appears to be some confusion. Would you mind stepping aside while we sort this out?" Naomi quietly accepted the request and moved a single step into the aisle, never taking her eyes off seat 2A. She had experienced this look before, not from one person, but from systems that quietly decided who belonged before asking a single question. Still, her heartbeat remained steady. She was not embarrassed. She was observing. Around her, passengers had already begun constructing stories from appearances alone. Simple black jeans, plain sneakers, a fitted navy sweater, no designer logos, no entourage, no visible signs of extraordinary wealth. Just another traveler, at least in their eyes. Ethan leaned back deeper into the seat, adjusting the first-class blanket across his lap with unmistakable confidence. "See," he said with a satisfied grin. "Problem solved." Naomi's eyes drifted briefly toward the aircraft door, still open, still waiting for the final passengers to board. Then she looked back at Ethan, calm as ever, almost as though she already knew something no one else inside that cabin had yet begun to understand. Naomi remained exactly where she was, composed enough that her silence became more noticeable than the conversation surrounding her. Nicole Harper glanced once more at the boarding pass before offering a courteous smile that somehow managed to feel dismissive at the same time. "Thank you for your patience, ma'am. Sometimes the seating system takes a moment to synchronize. If you would not mind waiting just a little longer, we will get everything resolved." Ethan let out another quiet laugh and leaned comfortably against the window. "There is nothing to resolve. I have been flying first class for 20 years. I know when someone is in the wrong place." A few passengers nodded almost instinctively, influenced more by confidence than by facts. The aircraft continued filling with travelers carrying briefcases, backpacks, and coffee cups, unaware that nearly every eye in the front cabin had shifted toward row 2. Naomi simply folded her boarding pass and slipped it back into her jacket pocket. "I can wait," she answered. "Truth usually arrives on time." Ethan smirked. "That sounds poetic, but this airplane is leaving in 15 minutes. Nicole turned toward him with an apologetic expression. "Thank you again for your understanding, sir." The choice of words did not escape anyone paying close attention. Without realizing it, she had already decided who deserved reassurance and who deserved suspicion. Naomi noticed it immediately. She had seen that subtle imbalance more times than she cared to count. It never began with shouting. It always started with assumptions disguised as courtesy. Another flight attendant approached from the galley carrying a tablet. Her name tag read Olivia Chun. She slowed for just a fraction of a second after recognizing Naomi's face, then glanced toward seat 2 Alpha before looking back at Nicole. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly. Nicole answered before Naomi could speak. "Minor seating confusion. We are handling it." Olivia's eyes moved from Ethan to Naomi and finally to the tablet in her own hands. Something about the exchange did not fit. She clearly remembered scanning every first-class boarding pass at the boarding door only minutes earlier. She remembered each passenger because there had been fewer than 20 of them. She especially remembered Naomi, who had thanked every crew member with genuine warmth before stepping onto the aircraft. Olivia opened her mouth as though she wanted to say something, but Nicole gave her a brief look that silently ended the conversation. "Please continue preparing the cabin," Nicole said. Olivia nodded, although uncertainty lingered across her face as she disappeared toward the forward galley. Ethan adjusted the reading light above his seat and looked toward Naomi again. "You know, if you just admit you made a mistake, everyone can move on." Naomi met his eyes without the slightest trace of frustration. "I did not make one." The answer was so calm that it unsettled him more than an argument would have. Nearby passengers continued whispering. One businessman quietly suggested that perhaps the airline had accidentally double-booked the seat. Another insisted that first-class travelers usually dressed differently. Their opinions floated through the cabin like invisible currents, shaping perceptions before evidence had the chance to speak. Nicole picked up the intercom handset mounted near the front service station and requested verification from the gate team. But even while waiting for a response, she continued addressing Ethan with confidence while treating Naomi like an inconvenience delaying departure. Outside, the jet bridge remained connected, and the final boarding announcements echoed faintly from the terminal. Inside, the atmosphere had changed completely. It no longer felt like a premium cabin preparing for takeoff. It felt like a quiet courtroom where nearly everyone had already chosen a side before hearing the full story, while Naomi stood alone with nothing except patience, certainty, and the knowledge that the next few minutes would reveal far more about everyone else than they ever could about her. The reply from the gate never came as quickly as Nicole expected, but that did not stop her from acting as though the answer had already been decided. She slipped Naomi's boarding pass beneath her tablet and folded her hands with polished confidence. "Ma'am, while we continue verifying the seating assignment, I am going to ask you to remain out of the aisle so boarding can finish smoothly." Naomi nodded once and stepped beside the first row without protest. She did not surrender her position. She simply removed herself from the path of other passengers. Ethan smiled with growing confidence, interpreting her patience as defeat. "You see," he said loudly enough for nearby travelers to hear. "People should know when they are wrong." A few uncomfortable laughs drifted through the cabin. Someone whispered that delays always started with one difficult passenger. Another quietly agreed, never realizing they had not heard Naomi raise her voice even once. The aircraft door remained open as the last travelers settled into their seats. Overhead bins clicked shut one after another, and the familiar sounds of boarding slowly faded beneath the tension surrounding row 2. Nicole reached for the cabin phone and contacted the cockpit. "Captain Foster, we have a seating dispute in first class. We may need a few extra minutes before departure." A calm voice answered through the receiver. "Do what you need to do. Keep me informed." Ethan leaned back comfortably and accepted a chilled bottle of sparkling water that Nicole offered with an apologetic smile. "Thank you for your patience, sir." Naomi noticed every detail, not because she felt insulted by the bottle of water, but because small gestures often revealed larger truths. Respect was being distributed before facts had been established. Olivia emerged from the galley carrying the passenger manifest on another tablet. Her eyes immediately searched for Nicole. "I checked the digital boarding records," she said carefully. "There might be something we should review together." Nicole interrupted before Olivia could continue. "Later. We are almost ready to close the cabin." Olivia hesitated. She looked toward Naomi, then toward seat 2 Alpha, where Ethan had already unfolded the premium menu and begun discussing wine selections with another passenger across the aisle. None of it felt right. Olivia clearly remembered welcoming Naomi aboard with the words, "Welcome to Skyline Air, Ms. Brooks." She even remembered Naomi thanking her by name after reading the name tag on her uniform. It had been a small moment, but one that stayed with her because very few passengers noticed junior crew members. Nicole lowered her voice. "Do not create confusion in front of guests." Olivia reluctantly stepped back, but uncertainty continued growing inside her. Meanwhile, Ethan decided to settle the matter himself. "Listen," he said while looking directly at Naomi. "There is no reason to embarrass yourself. Just admit you walked into the wrong cabin. It happens." Naomi answered with the same steady expression she had carried since boarding. "No, it does not happen. Not today." The simplicity of her response unsettled him. There was no apology, no hesitation, no attempt to convince anyone. Only certainty. Captain Ryan Foster finally appeared from the cockpit, his navy jacket pressed perfectly, his expression professional but impatient. He glanced first at Ethan, then at Naomi, and finally at Nicole. "Can someone explain what is delaying my flight?" Nicole answered immediately. "We believe there is an issue with one passenger's seating assignment." Before Naomi could say a single word, Ethan extended his hand toward the captain with complete confidence. "I appreciate you coming up here. I have been waiting while she insists this is her seat." Captain Foster gave Ethan a reassuring nod before turning toward Naomi. "Ma'am, I need to see your boarding pass." Naomi calmly reached into her jacket and handed it over once again. The captain studied it only briefly before looking back at Nicole instead of Naomi. In that quiet exchange, without realizing it, another decision had already been made. Facts were still waiting to be examined, but assumptions had begun flying long before the airplane ever left the gate. Captain Ryan Foster held Naomi's boarding pass for another moment before handing it back with measured politeness. "Thank you, ma'am. Please remain here while we complete one final verification." His words sounded neutral, but his attention immediately shifted toward Nicole instead of the passenger holding the valid ticket. Naomi accepted the boarding pass without a trace of irritation and slipped it carefully into her jacket pocket once again. Across the aisle, Ethan smiled with growing confidence. "I told you," he said to no one in particular. "The system always catches mistakes." Several passengers relaxed, believing the situation was nearly over. One woman quietly returned to her magazine. Another traveler reached for his laptop, assuming departure would resume within minutes. The atmosphere was settling, but only on the surface. Beneath it, Olivia Chun felt something pulling at her memory. She looked down at the electronic manifest still glowing in her hands. Every boarding event carried a timestamp. Every scanned ticket left a record. She remembered Naomi's calm smile at the boarding door. She remembered the green confirmation on the scanner. She even remembered saying, "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Brooks," before watching Naomi walk toward the front of the aircraft. That memory was too clear to dismiss. Olivia stepped toward Nicole again, this time lowering her voice. "I really think we should compare the boarding log with the seating manifest before asking her to move." Nicole barely looked up. "The captain is handling it now. But I scanned her ticket myself," Olivia replied quietly. Seat 2 Alpha showed green. Nicole's expression tightened for the first time. "Olivia, continue preparing the cabin. We cannot delay departure over speculation." Olivia hesitated. She had been with the airline for less than a year, still learning procedures, still believing that facts mattered more than appearances. Yet what she had witnessed over the past several minutes no longer felt like a routine seating issue. It felt as though everyone had unconsciously accepted one version of the story simply because it was easier than questioning it. Captain Foster turned toward Ethan. "Sir, thank you for your patience. We appreciate your cooperation." Ethan nodded confidently. Anything to help keep things moving. Naomi watched the exchange in silence. She had learned years earlier that the loudest voice in the room was rarely the strongest one. Real authority did not rush to defend itself. It waited for truth to become impossible to ignore. Olivia quietly unlocked another screen on her tablet. The boarding records appeared line by line. Flight number, gate assignment, passenger names, timestamp after timestamp. Her eyes stopped suddenly. There it was. Naomi Brooks. Boarding completed. Seat 2. Alpha. Verified. Olivia blinked once to make certain she had not misread it. The information was unmistakable. She looked toward Nicole, then toward Captain Foster, realizing neither of them had actually examined the complete record. They had relied on assumptions built from a conversation that began before anyone checked the facts. Her heartbeat quickened. She took one careful step forward. "Captain," she said respectfully, "there is something you should probably see." Before she could hand him the tablet, Nicole gently lowered Olivia's arm. "Not now," she whispered. "We already have enough confusion." Olivia stared at her in disbelief. The evidence was sitting inches away, yet no one seemed interested in looking at it. Nearby passengers noticed the hesitation. A businessman in row 3 quietly leaned toward his wife. "Why would they ignore the tablet if it has the answer?" she whispered back. For the first time since boarding began, uncertainty started spreading through the cabin in the opposite direction. People who had automatically believed Ethan began watching the crew instead. Naomi noticed the shift immediately, but remained perfectly still. She neither encouraged it nor commented on it. She simply observed as doubt slowly replaced certainty, and in that quiet change, the first crack appeared in the story everyone thought they already understood. Olivia's fingers tightened around the tablet as the boarding record remained illuminated on the screen, impossible to misunderstand and increasingly impossible to ignore. She looked once more at Naomi, who stood with quiet composure near the first row, then back at Captain Foster. Before she could speak again, Ethan reached toward the center console beside Seat 2 Alpha and casually lifted the premium amenity kit that had been prepared for Naomi's flight. "Well," he said with a satisfied grin, "if I am going to be delayed, I might as well get comfortable." He unwrapped the headphones, placed them around his neck, and reached for the welcome glass that had been set beside the window before boarding. His confidence spread through the cabin like permission. Nicole offered an uneasy smile instead of correcting him. That single choice said more than any announcement over the public address system ever could. Naomi watched quietly as another person enjoyed privileges attached to a seat that was never his. She did not object. She simply observed each decision being made. Captain Foster folded his arms. "Ma'am," he said politely, "if we cannot resolve this immediately, I may need to ask you to accept another first-class seat so we can avoid delaying everyone else." Naomi looked directly at him. "If another passenger occupied your assigned seat and refused to move, would that become the new policy?" The captain hesitated for only a moment. "We are trying to find a practical solution," Naomi answered softly. "Practical solutions should never replace correct ones." The words settled over the cabin with unexpected weight. A businessman across the aisle quietly lowered his laptop. A retired schoolteacher near the front removed her reading glasses and studied Naomi with growing curiosity. She had expected anger, but found only remarkable restraint. Meanwhile, Olivia could no longer remain silent. She stepped beside the captain and carefully turned the tablet so only he could see the display. "Captain," she whispered, "the boarding scan shows Ms. Brooks checked into Seat 2 Alpha at the gate. The record is complete." Captain Foster glanced at the screen, but before he could study it, Nicole gently lowered the device again. "Electronic records occasionally lag behind the live manifest," she said quickly. "We should wait for operations." Olivia frowned. She knew that explanation did not fit the system she worked with every day. The timestamp had been locked the moment Naomi boarded. It could not suddenly become uncertain. Ethan leaned back even farther and looked toward Naomi with a smile that carried more assumption than triumph. "You know what your real problem is?" he asked. "You keep acting like you deserve something just because you say you do." Naomi held his gaze without blinking. His words reached farther back than he could possibly imagine. For an instant, the bright cabin lights dissolved into another memory. 22 years earlier, Naomi had stood outside an airport lounge after a cross-country business trip, wearing the only suit she could afford. An employee had looked at her membership card, looked at her face, and quietly asked whether she had borrowed someone else's credentials. She had walked away that day with tears she refused to let anyone see. She promised herself then that success would never change who she was, but it would change what she could build. The memory vanished as quickly as it arrived. Naomi returned to the present with the same steady expression she had worn since boarding. "No," she replied gently. "My only problem today is that too many people have decided what is true before looking at what is real." Silence spread across the first-class cabin once again. This time it felt different. It no longer belonged to certainty. It belonged to doubt. Olivia looked from the boarding record to Naomi and realized she was no longer witnessing a seating dispute. She was witnessing a test of character, and with every passing minute, the wrong people continued failing it while the one person standing alone never needed to raise her voice. The cabin remained suspended in an uneasy silence that felt heavier than any turbulence waiting beyond the runway. Nobody spoke for several long seconds. Even the routine announcements from the terminal outside seemed distant now, as though the entire airport had paused to watch what would happen next. Naomi glanced briefly at the departure clock mounted near the boarding door before reaching calmly into the pocket of her jacket. Ethan noticed the movement and smiled with quiet satisfaction. "Finally calling someone to book another flight?" he asked. Naomi ignored the remark completely. She unlocked her phone, selected a single contact, and lifted it to her ear without changing her expression. The call connected almost immediately. "Good afternoon, Ms. Brooks," a composed female voice answered. "This is Rachel." Naomi spoke quietly enough that only the nearest rows could hear her. "Rachel, please activate Executive Protocol 7 for Flight 821. Begin a full operational review immediately." There was no hesitation on the other end. "Understood. Executive Protocol 7 is now active. Corporate Operations has been notified. Would you like the executive response team included?" Naomi answered with the same calm certainty she had carried since stepping onto the aircraft. "Yes. Document everything from the moment boarding began. Preserve all communication records and passenger seating logs." Rachel replied, "Already in progress. The operations center will receive the file within 60 seconds. Naomi thanked her, ended the call, and quietly returned her phone to her pocket. Ethan laughed openly. "Executive protocol? That sounds impressive." A few passengers smiled awkwardly, uncertain whether they had just witnessed confidence or imagination. Nicole folded her arms. "Ma'am, if this is an attempt to delay departure, it is not going to change the seating assignment." Naomi looked directly at her. "I did not make that call to change a seat." Nicole frowned slightly. "Then why did you make it?" Naomi answered without raising her voice. "To understand why a verified passenger was treated as though verification never mattered." Those words lingered in the air long after she finished speaking. Olivia felt a chill despite the perfectly controlled cabin temperature. She knew enough about company procedures to recognize that no ordinary traveler would know the phrase Executive Protocol 7. It was terminology she had only heard during employee orientation, mentioned briefly as part of emergency executive procedures that almost never occurred. She quietly opened her tablet again and refreshed the system. At first, nothing appeared different. Then several status indicators unexpectedly changed color. Internal notifications began appearing across the top of the screen. Corporate operations request received. Flight activity locked for review. Cabin event documentation initiated. Olivia stared at the display, her pulse quickening. None of those messages could be generated by a passenger complaint. They required authorization from the highest operational levels inside the airline. She slowly looked toward Naomi, who remained perfectly composed beside the first row. Captain Foster noticed Olivia's expression. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Olivia hesitated before turning the tablet toward him. "Captain, these alerts were not here a moment ago." His eyes narrowed as he read the screen. Before he could respond, the cockpit communication panel chimed with a priority signal that overrode every routine message. Nicole looked toward the captain with visible confusion. "We are receiving another call from operations." Captain Foster reached for the handset almost automatically. The confidence that had filled the cabin only moments earlier began dissolving into uncertainty. Ethan looked around, still convinced everything would soon return to normal, but for the first time since taking seat 2 Alpha, even his smile began to fade. Somewhere beyond the aircraft door, invisible to everyone inside the cabin, An entire corporate system had quietly begun paying attention, and the balance of power was already starting to move without a single raised voice. The priority chime echoed through the cockpit a second time, sharper now, impossible to ignore. Captain Ryan Foster excused himself without another word and stepped through the cockpit door, closing it behind him. The first-class cabin remained completely still. Every passenger watched the closed door as though the answer to the entire afternoon now existed on the other side of it. Nicole attempted to recover the calm atmosphere with a practiced smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We expect to depart shortly." Her voice sounded professional, but even she could hear the uncertainty beneath it. Ethan folded his arms with forced confidence. "Probably just another operations delay," he muttered. "Nothing to do with this." Naomi said nothing. She simply looked through the aircraft window toward the terminal, where baggage carts continued moving beneath the afternoon sun. To everyone else, it looked like an ordinary airport. To Naomi, it looked like an organization quietly waking up. Inside the cockpit, Captain Foster lifted the secure handset. Captain Ryan Foster speaking. The voice on the other end was calm, direct, and unmistakably authoritative. "Captain Foster, this is Daniel Mercer, Executive Vice President of Corporate Operations. Keep the aircraft at the gate. Do not close the boarding door. This flight is under immediate executive review." Ryan straightened instinctively. "May I ask what prompted the review?" There was a brief pause before the answer arrived. "An Executive Protocol 7 authorization has been verified. Preserve the current seating arrangement exactly as it is. No passenger is to be relocated until further instruction." Ryan felt the confidence drain from his face. Executive Protocol 7 was mentioned only during leadership training, reserved for situations involving the highest levels of corporate oversight. It was never activated casually. "Understood," he answered quietly. "There is one more instruction," Daniel Mercer continued. "You are about to receive a secure identity confirmation. Read it carefully before taking another action." A document appeared instantly on the cockpit display. Ryan's eyes moved across the first line, then stopped completely. "Passenger, Naomi Brooks. Executive classification, Chief Executive Officer. Majority owner, Skyline Air Holdings." He read the words again, hoping he had misunderstood them. He had not. His breathing slowed as every conversation from the previous 20 minutes replayed inside his mind. The boarding pass, the ignored evidence, Olivia's tablet, Nicole's assumptions, Ethan's comments, Naomi's composure. None of it had been accidental. Outside the cockpit, Nicole noticed the delay stretching longer than expected. She glanced toward Ethan, trying to reassure him with another polite smile, but this time the gesture felt hollow. Olivia quietly stood beside the service station, still holding the tablet that had displayed the correct boarding record from the beginning. Several passengers had stopped pretending to read or work. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on the cockpit door. Ethan shifted uneasily in seat 2 Alpha for the first time. "What is taking so long?" he asked. Nobody answered. A moment later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Foster stepped back into the cabin looking like a completely different man. The confidence that had filled his posture earlier had been replaced by careful restraint. He did not walk toward Ethan first. He walked directly toward Naomi. The entire first-class cabin fell silent as he stopped beside her, drew a slow breath, and lowered his voice with unmistakable respect. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "I owe you my sincere apology. There is something everyone on this aircraft needs to know." Captain Foster's words seemed to drain every sound from the cabin. Even the steady ventilation overhead felt quieter as dozens of passengers watched Naomi Brooks with entirely new eyes. Ethan Caldwell stared at the captain in disbelief before forcing a nervous laugh. "Come on. This is some kind of misunderstanding." Captain Foster did not even glance in his direction. His attention remained fixed on Naomi. "Corporate operations has confirmed your identity, Ms. Brooks. They have instructed us to preserve the cabin exactly as it is until their review is complete." Naomi acknowledged him with a small nod. "Thank you, Captain." There was no satisfaction in her voice. No triumph. Only calm professionalism. Nicole felt the color leave her face. She looked from Naomi to Olivia's tablet, suddenly realizing the younger flight attendant had been right from the very beginning. Olivia quietly lowered her eyes. She had wanted someone to examine the facts before making assumptions. Now the facts had arrived with a force no one could dismiss. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in seat 2 Alpha. If she is really who you say she is, then why did she not tell anyone? Naomi answered before the captain could speak. Because respect should not depend on recognition. Her words settled over the cabin more heavily than any announcement ever could. I presented my boarding pass. I answered every question. I remained patient while people decided who belonged here before looking at the evidence. If my title had been necessary for basic fairness, then the problem was never the seating assignment. Several passengers slowly lowered their heads. The retired schoolteacher who had watched the exchange from the beginning quietly whispered, "She is right." Across the aisle, the businessman who had earlier assumed Naomi was in the wrong closed his laptop without saying a word. Nicole finally found the courage to speak. "Ms. Brooks, I sincerely apologize. I should have reviewed the complete record before reaching any conclusions." Naomi looked at her kindly but directly. "The boarding record was available. Olivia tried to show it to you. The information was never missing. Only the willingness to consider it." Olivia looked up, surprised that Naomi had noticed every detail despite saying so little throughout the entire encounter. Before anyone could respond, the cabin communication panel chimed again. Captain Foster answered immediately. "Yes, Captain Foster speaking." The reply came through the speaker clearly enough for those standing nearby to hear. "Corporate operations has completed the first phase of its review. Effective immediately, the passenger assigned to seat 2 Alpha is to be reseated according to company policy. The original seating assignment will be restored before departure." Captain Foster acknowledged the instruction and turned toward Ethan. His tone remained professional, but it no longer carried uncertainty. "Mr. Caldwell, I am going to ask you to gather your belongings. Seat 2 Alpha belongs to Ms. Brooks." Ethan remained frozen for several seconds, looking around the cabin as though expecting someone to defend him. Nobody did. The passengers who had quietly accepted his confidence earlier now watched in complete silence. He slowly removed the headphones, folded the blanket, and placed the unopened amenity kit back where he had found it. Every movement seemed smaller than the one before. As he stepped into the aisle, Naomi did not say a single critical word. She simply waited. Captain Foster gently motioned toward the restored seat. "Ms. Brooks, your seat is ready." Naomi walked forward with the same measured pace she had maintained since boarding. There was no dramatic gesture, no celebration, no need to prove anything further. She placed her carry-on beneath the seat in front of her, settled into seat 2 Alpha, and looked briefly out the window. Around her, the first-class cabin remained completely silent, because everyone present now understood that the most important lesson that afternoon had never been about who owned an airline. It had been about how easily dignity can be overlooked when people mistake appearance for identity. The boarding door remained open for several more minutes while the final steps of the executive review quietly unfolded. No raised voices echoed through the cabin. No dramatic confrontation followed. Instead, the atmosphere changed in a far more powerful way. Every assumption that had filled the first-class cabin only minutes earlier had been replaced by thoughtful silence. Captain Foster received one final message from corporate operations. Read it carefully, then looked toward Naomi. "Ms. Brooks, the review team has confirmed that a complete report will be conducted after landing. Every communication, every decision, and every operational record from today has been preserved." Naomi gave a small nod. "Thank you, Captain. Make sure the review focuses on improving the process, not protecting reputations." Those words surprised everyone listening. She was not asking for revenge. She was asking for accountability. Nicole stood quietly near the galley, reflecting on every decision she had made since boarding began. Olivia remained beside her, still holding the tablet that had contained the correct answer from the very beginning. Nicole finally turned toward the younger flight attendant. "You were trying to help us see the facts." Olivia answered gently. "I was only trying to make sure we looked at them before reaching a conclusion." Nicole lowered her eyes. "Next time I will." Across the aisle, Ethan sat silently in his reassigned seat farther back in the cabin. He stared out the window, no longer interested in making conversation. The confidence that had carried him through the first half of the afternoon had disappeared, replaced by something far more uncomfortable: reflection. Around him, passengers began returning to their normal routines, but many continued glancing toward Naomi with quiet admiration. The retired schoolteacher smiled warmly before speaking across the aisle. Thank you for staying calm. Naomi returned the smile. Calm gives truth time to arrive. The words lingered long after the conversation ended. Captain Foster made one final announcement. Over the cabin speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We appreciate your professionalism today. We are now ready for departure. The boarding door finally closed. The jet bridge slowly pulled away from the aircraft. Outside the window, the afternoon sunlight stretched across the runway as the engines gradually came to life. Inside the cabin, everything looked exactly as it should have from the beginning. Naomi rested comfortably in seat 2 Alpha, looking out at the airport she had visited countless times before. Yet this flight would be remembered differently. Not because the owner of the airline had boarded unnoticed. Not because someone occupied the wrong seat. But because a simple moment revealed how easily appearances can influence decisions when people stop asking questions. As the aircraft began pushing back from the gate, Naomi quietly opened her notebook and wrote a single sentence across the top of a blank page. Respect must be the first service every passenger receives. She underlined it once, closed the notebook, and looked out the window again. Somewhere inside the corporate offices waiting for her after landing, policies would be reviewed, training would be strengthened, and procedures would become clearer. Those changes would matter. But the greatest lesson from that afternoon required no policy manual at all. Every person deserves fairness before judgment. Every voice deserves to be heard before conclusions are reached. Every passenger deserves dignity, whether they are wearing a tailored business suit or a simple sweater and jeans. Titles can reveal authority, but character reveals leadership. Naomi never needed to announce who she was in order to prove her worth. She only needed the truth to be given the same opportunity that every person deserves. As the airplane lifted into the sky above the clouds, the cabin finally became what it should have been all along. A place where every seat carried the same expectation of respect, and where the strongest statement anyone made that day was not spoken loudly at all. It was lived quietly, patiently, and with the kind of dignity that no boarding pass could ever fully describe.